Hello, everybody, and welcome to this special edition of Heavy Metal History that I'm calling Heavy Horror History. What I'm going to do with this little video here is just take you through 5 of my favorite personal heavy metal horror films, because longtime listeners will know that I talk all the time how much about horror and heavy metal have this huge crossover because they're two very counterculture niche things. A lot of metal bands tend to sing about what is in horror films. So I thought it'd be fun to talk about, 5 films briefly and kind of give you some facts on the screen as we go along. So with that, let's just get into it. We're going to start with the number 5 film here on my list, and that is Black Roses. And the plot summary of this film is that demons hypnotize the general public by posing as a rock and roll band. Yes, I know rock and roll, it's not really heavy metal, but the 80s, there was hair metal, and this kind of delves into that. So a lot of these 80s films revolved around the satanic panic thing that was going on back then. You're going to see that a lot in the films that I've chosen. It's all like, heavy metal is the devil and parents hate it, and that is the big theme of this film. It is a product of its time in that respect. There is a bunch of like goofy, cheesy effects, but that's like the part that I love about horror the most, the practical puppets and like makeup effects on everybody. It's such a cool thing about this film that I really love. And there's a couple things about this film, it's got some pretty funny kills. There's one where like Vincent Pastore's character, he's listening to the album and it's got this fat like bass line playing, and the next thing you know, this giant monster like pops out of the speaker and starts trying to like suck him into it, and he gets sucked into a speaker. I mean, it's hilarious. And then, not only that, like the fact that these parents are so against this band playing because they're like, oh my God, they're satanic. We don't want our kids listening to it. There's a whole opening sequence with a sound bite that a metal band actually uses. It's the band Homewrecker. Their opening track on their 2012 album, they use a sound clip from this film, and it's like perfect the way they like play into it. And the opening track is just like an opening breakdown or whatever, but it's used to very good effect, and it's really funny that it's talking about this satanic band and everything. So the way they use it's really interesting. The turn at the end of the film, it's like they don't want this band playing in their town, but every kid is like, no, we want to go see this band. We're gonna do it. And the parents are like, no, 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 no. So eventually they acquiesce, and the band is playing a show, and the show starts, and all the parents are there, and it's just like this generic 80s rock ballad. The band looks normal, they're all dressed in white, and it's kind of a poppy kind of tune, and the parents are like, oh, this isn't as bad as I thought, and they're all just kind of like, well, maybe we overacted a little bit. And so then they all leave, and by the way, spoilers, guys, if you haven't seen these movies, that's fine. This isn't really going to ruin anything. I'm not going to delve into, plot points. Plus, it's horror, like whatever. Anyways, the big turning point is after the parents leave, the lights go off, and you hear this quick little shred, and then the lights come on. Next thing you know, the band like just burns into this like hair metal 80s Motley Crue Shout at the Devil type song, and then they're all in like black leather and stuff like that. And then the other turn is when they actually turn into the demons, and that's like the finality of the film, the final like final act of the film when everything goes tits up, so to speak. So that is my number 5 pick. My last little thing here is like some of the monster or like demon designs are a little goofy looking, but I think that's part of the fun of the film. You don't expect a demon to kind of look like a Muppet almost. Maybe that's a bad comparison, but it's just watch it. That's all I got to say. Just watch it. It's a fun film. That is my number 5 pick to start off with Halloween. So let's go into number 4. All right, so my number 4 pick is actually from a past guest that we have had on the show. It is Sadistic Intentions. Came out in 2018. It was written and directed by Eric Pennycoff, who I had on the podcast right after seeing this actually at a film festival. Eric is a huge heavy metal fan. If you want to go back and check out that episode, I definitely think you should. It is not up on the YouTube because we weren't doing video at that time, but it is up on Spotify if you want to go listen to it, or iTunes, wherever you listen to podcasts. The film stars Taylor Zoutke, my man Jeremy Gardner, who I absolutely love, and Michael Patrick Nicholson, who we're going to get into in just a moment about his performance in this film. But basically, the conceit of the film is that a psychotic musician lures his fellow bandmate and an unsuspecting woman to a remote mansion for a night of romantic deceit and grinding metal mayhem. Yeah, so Jeremy Gardner, man, where do I start with this guy? He is like a unsung gem in the indie horror world. I love pretty much everything he's ever been in. And he kind of plays the unsuspecting bandmate who got lured to the house. There's the way they set everything up in this film, and I'm not going to spoil everything, but it is one of those red herring kind of films that you think he's in on it for the longest time until you realize when shit goes again tits up. Maybe he wasn't, and then maybe he was, but you never really know. It's all about luring him and this girl to this house by the other bandmate, Kevin. And this guy's performance is something else. He is channeling his inner Crispin Glover to like level 10, and it is such a good performance. I mean, he steals the movie for me. And it's funny too, because like the music they're making is very like grindcore, industrial type stuff, kind of like Body. And I know for a fact that Pennycoff is a huge fan of both those bands, so it's very cool to see that like he used those influences as, yeah, this is the kind of band these two guys would have. There's a really great scene too with some guitar wire that I'm not going to go into here, but oh boy, it'll make you think a little different about fucking up with guitars and strings and everything like that. Now, it isn't a full-on horror movie. It's a little bit of a thriller more so than like like a slasher type movie. So don't think it's like blood and guts and gore and stuff because it's not really entirely like that. But it does have that horror feel, and it is very heavy metal themed. And again, I think with Jeremy Gardner and Michael Patrick Nicholson's like their characters, they are like, and Taylor Zoutke as well. Like all the actors in this film are very good. It's very tense. So definitely check that out if you haven't. It is one of my favorites. And again, maybe a little favoritism here because I've had Eric on the podcast. We kept in touch somewhat over the years. But yeah, that's my number 4 pick. Definitely check it out. It's a fun film. Let's move on to number 3. So number 3 is The Gate. The Gate is a 1987 film starring Stephen Dorff. You would probably, listeners out there, know him best from Blade. And he's like the only kind of big actor in this film. I really only want to touch on like names, not to discredit anybody who's ever worked on the film, but unless you're like a huge film buff like me, a lot of you listening probably don't give a shit. So the storyline is pretty simple. You got two young boys. They accidentally release a horde of nasty pint-sized demons from a hole in a suburban backyard. What follows is a classic battle between good and evil as the two kids struggle to overcome a nightmarish hell that literally begins to take over the earth. Now, but the thing about this unleashing the demons is that the whole conceit is they play a heavy metal record backwards. Thanks to Louis Tripp, who played Terry, he's the metalhead in the film, and he has this album that he wants to play, and he plays it backwards, and it opens up a hole in their backyard, and they find a rock. They open the rock, and then that's when all hell breaks loose. I remember seeing this film as a kid, and it scared the living shit out of me with those little demons. I don't know why, because in hindsight now it's a little goofy because everything was kind of shot with like actors to like backing screens, so to like force the perspective and stuff like that. But I think again that's part of the charm of these 80s films is like the practicalness of the effects and how they shot everything. And again, this is another film that plays into like that satanic panic of the 80s, Louis Tripp, Terry, his character is the metalhead, and he's wearing like heavy metal vests, and but he looks like kind of a nerd. Whereas like Steven Dorff's character Glenn is just kind of like this normal kid who likes rockets and seems more sciency, but somehow they both get along because they're just like nerds, so to speak. Because I think that was another thing in the '80s. Is like a lot of metalheads were considered nerds. I don't know how it is today. I'm not in school anymore, but I feel like people have kind of come around to metalheads a little bit more. Who knows? Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic, their friendship, and it is one thing that like makes this movie so fun and kind of not as scary as it's kind of like a buddy movie in a way between them two, but it's a classic, man. I mean, just the playing of the record Unleashes Hell is beautiful. It's done in such a cool way, and I think it's a classic heavy metal horror kind of film. So that's my number 3. Let's move on to number 2. And that is Trick or Treat, not to be confused with Trick or Treat, the anthology film that came out in 2007. No, this is a 1986 film, and it was directed by Charles Martin Smith with a bunch of writers on it. And there's some really good cameos in this film, I guess, or at least two noticeable ones. You have Gene Simmons and Ozzy Osbourne. And in fact, an interesting thing about this film, I didn't really put this on the screen as a fact, but there are so many different film covers for Trick or Treat that at one point they didn't really know how to market the movie, or like, there were no big stars in it, that they literally just put Gene Simmons and Ozzy Osbourne on one of the covers as if they were the stars, even though they are literally barely in the film. And again, this is another one of those satanic panic 80s heavy metal kind of things where the conceit of the film is that, there's a teenager who's bullied and he's devastated after the death of his heavy metal idol, Sammy Kerr. But as Halloween night approaches, he discovers that he may be the only one who can stop Sammy from making a satanic comeback from beyond the grave. This film feels a little bit like Carrie in that respect, in that, this dude's getting bullied. There's a scene early on in the beginning where he's in the locker room and everybody's taunting him, and he gets thrown out like butt ass naked in front of a bunch of girls, and it's very Carrie-esque, except he's not on his period. But again, this is one where he plays a record backwards, and Sammy, he starts being haunted by Sammy and this visage of Sammy. And let me just say, I think Sammy Kerr is probably one of the best like 80s horror villains. He's so fucked up looking, and when he comes back, like that initial scene of like him coming back before the performance, oh man, it's so good. The tension building of him just like smashing on his thigh, and like the beat going along with it, and then the whole concert scene is just incredible the way it all unravels. It's so good. And they made an actual soundtrack with a band for this film. I've put some facts on the screen of who all is in that band, but it's a band called Fastway, and I'm sure a lot of you heard the song Trick or Treat. I would play it, but the YouTube algorithm, they keep flagging my stuff every time I play something, so I've given up on that. But regardless, man, it's such a fun movie. It's genuinely scary at some points, but it's also genuinely kind of goofy at some points, and again, that's part of the '80s charm of horror films. But I think if you look at the way Sammy Kerr comes back and like the way he looks, it's so horrifying that this metal guy came back as like this satanic being, so to speak, and metal kills a bunch of people in the end. That's the funny part of it all. Heavy death to heavy metal, or heavy metal death, however you want to put it. But it's so fun, man. I mean, you absolutely have to check this one out. And again, the cameos with Gene Simmons and Ozzy Osbourne are really funny. Well, maybe not so much Gene Simmons, but Ozzy is very funny. He plays like a preacher, which is hilarious. But yeah, that is my number 2 pick. It was honestly almost my number 1 pick. I don't know. I'll get into it when we get into the number 1 pick. I just think that this could be number 1. It's such a good heavy metal like horror film. let's get on to the number one pick. I'm sure you all guessed, even just watching, before watching the video, what I was going to pick and what everybody usually picks. And yes, that is Deathgasm. I mean, how can it not be the number one? It's the modern equivalent of heavy metal horror. There's literally a heavy metal band in the movie that plays a satanic song and unleashes hell. Came out in 2015, and it was starring Milo Cawthorn, James Joshua Blake, and Kimberly Crossman. And, this film embodies a lot of what I love about horror in that it's practical effects, but it's a modern film, and it kind of wears its influences on its sleeve, in that it's very, very Evil Dead. Jason Lee Howden has even admitted this in interviews. He was very influenced by Evil Dead, and I love that. Evil Dead's one of my favorite horror movies of all time. I think that him using that as the platform for this film is great. And, the conceit of the band finding like this, I guess, demonic music sheet and ended up playing it, and then that's what unleashes the demons is so fun. The gore effects are so good in this film too, man. They're not like quite Terrifier level, but man, they're really good. And the movie's funny too. It's like a dark horror comedy. Like there's a lot of really funny scenes, especially with the keyboard player. I'm blanking on his name right now, but he's really funny in the movie. The villain has this really funny scene where like they cut off some guy's head and they didn't put down a tarp, and he's like, "You ruined this like $5,000 carpet. Do it again." And so you think that they're gonna pull like some kind of, because the film's very like magic-y, so you think they're gonna like bring the dude back to life and like cut his head off again, but no. The that guy literally picks up the head, holds it where it was, and the guy with the sword comes down again real slow, and they just drop the head. And that was enough to satiate him doing it again. It's so funny. I love that part of the movie. Also, we know all the memes from it that have been taken of the main character in the corpse paint sitting next to the beautiful blonde, normal-looking girl, and him eating ice cream. That's a big one that's gone around. But I mean, yeah, the film is so fun, and like for a modern heavy metal horror movie, which we aren't getting a ton of, I think it's great. It's so good. And, the only reason it's on top of everybody's list is because it is modern, and I think Trick or Treat is a little more obscure. So that's kind of why I figured it should be number one, and it is a good film. Now, on top of that, they are making a sequel. In fact, they've crowdfunded it. It's finished. They finished filming. Matt Heafy is involved with a lot of stuff with it. He was in it. He's writing the music for it, or scoring it, I guess. And that will be out sometime, which is awesome. I would love to get Jason Lee on the podcast and talk to him about it. But yeah, so we're getting a sequel, which is even more badass. So, that might be my new number one, depending on how good it is. But we'll see. Because it's been almost 10 years at this point since the last one. So who knows how good it will be. So that is heavy horror history. I hope you enjoyed these picks. I hope you check out these films because they're all so fun and so awesome. And yeah, I don't know if we'll be able to do this again next year because there's not, like I said, not really a ton of these kind of films. But who knows? We'll figure something out. Thank you all so much for checking this out. If this is your first time checking out the channel, please hit like and subscribe. This is kind of really important to grow this channel. If you like the podcast, check it out. It's on Spotify, Apple, YouTube. If you want to watch it, it's on YouTube. It's free. Never going to charge for this stuff. But I would like to grow it so that way I could do other things with the podcast. So thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.